I'm just gonna have to accept that the hair will never be right. So in today's video, I'm going to try to explain why economic growth under a capitalist/consumerist system is bad. Uber simplified version is that eventually we're gonna run out of stuff. There is a reason why in nature nothing grows forever. I'm gonna link somewhere this hamster video that a professor once showed me that is at the very least worth a watch because it's hilarious in an absurd kind of way. For example, if you grew at the same rate as you did when you were a baby for your whole life, you would be ginormous. It would take an unspeakable amount of food just to keep you alive. And that's not even beginning to think about all of the other ways in which we use resources. According to footprintcalculator.org, which is a website that calculates your carbon footprint, we would need 2.4 Earths to sustain my lifestyle if everybody on Earth lived the exact same way. And admittedly, I was probably being a little generous with myself answering some of the questions. The average first world lifestyle results in about 3 to 4 Earths. Highly dependent on the country you live in, but anyway, that's the super oversimplified version. Nothing in nature grows forever, so why do most economists and politicians and regular people operate under the assumption that economic growth forever is good? Well, it's kind of complicated, and economics was never my strong suit, but basically because capitalism. This is where things get confusing. I'm going to try to explain 3 reasons why capitalism and growth go hand in hand. First, corporations have to maximize profits and productivity in order to not get outcompeted by other companies. There is a reason why capitalism is designed this way. In theory, competition promotes innovation and efficiency and lots of other good things which we have benefited from. But as we'll talk about in a little bit, there are consequences to this kind of thinking. There are also some counterexamples of contemporary businesses that are challenging the status quo a little bit. Probably the most famous example is Patagonia's "Don't Buy This Jacket" ad, which essentially tried to get customers to think twice about the environmental impact of their purchases, which of course only accelerated their growth as a company, and I could get into a whole side thing about whether or not that's ultimately a good or a bad thing, but I digress. Reason 2, debt. In order to pay back debt plus interest, the amount of money in the economy needs to increase. For example, the reason why the economy high-key collapsed in 2008 is because debts were almost not being repaid. And reason 3, money is power. Economic growth means a country has a larger tax base and therefore the government has more money to invest in the military. And for much longer than even capitalism has been around, military power has determined the success or failure of a government. The Western world has operated under a capitalist system since about the 17th century, so at this point it's kind of just the status quo. But like the hamster example shows, we have a limited amount of resources to work with. And then there are also the secondary effects of production like pollution and deforestation and habitat loss and biodiversity loss, etc., etc. These things ultimately affect our lives because we need clean soils and clean waters to grow food to sustain our lives. Under capitalism, corporations argue that less regulation means that they can grow faster and create more jobs, and this is a good thing for everybody, but ultimately less regulation has a number of side effects on the environment. Resource depletion is already threatening to cause what experts are calling resource wars. The idea is essentially that if resources are depleted, people have to fight over what is left. Thus, some argue that economic growth promotes national security by supporting the military. However, a sustainable economy would be more conducive to peace and diplomacy and be better for national security in the long run. A popular solution to these problems is simply switching to a sustainable economy. Sounds pretty straightforward. Green growth theory says that environmental growth can ultimately be made compatible with sustainability through technological change and substitutions. Even the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which are kind of the driving force behind a lot of nonprofit work all over the world, operate under this assumption. However, there is no actual empirical evidence that this is possible. Even if we implemented the most aggressive and optimistic policies for carbon taxation and switching to renewable energies and all that good stuff, scientists don't think we'd be able to reduce carbon emissions fast enough to avoid the most drastic effects of climate change if the economy also continues to grow. Even if you don't give a shit about the environment, economic growth also hasn't improved general societal well-being. In fact, when you control for all possible variables, the median household income in America has declined since 1999. The US economy is nearly 6 times bigger than it was in 1960, but according to the UN World Happiness Report, the happiness index has not increased even a little bit. This is at least in part due to the fact that we perceive happiness in relation to others. So while the economy has been growing, so has income inequality, and that has ultimately made us less satisfied. I read an article recently about why now is the time that we need to be talking about this, because the economy is experiencing the great pause. The pandemic has essentially shut down the engines that drive economic growth. I'm not saying this is not a deeply uncomfortable experience, but if we see it as an opportunity to evaluate what we truly value, both individually and as a society, we might just be able to do something about the fundamental flaws of capitalism that I described here: environmental consequences and inequality. When the pandemic is over, we simply can't afford to forget what we've learned, and we cannot afford to let the economy go back to business as usual. So yeah, if that's a conversation you want to be a part of, feel free to subscribe to this channel, go find the subreddit, follow me on Instagram or Twitter, tell your friends and family. If you have questions or comments or counter arguments, feel free to post in the subreddit and chat to me over there. And yeah, I don't want to spend too much time on this doom and gloom, we're all gonna die kind of stuff, so hopefully in the next couple videos we'll get to talking about solutions. Really though, what is this doing?